Porch Conversations today. We're here at the Harmony Center, and our guests are Don and Joanne Mott. Thank you so much for being here. I'm looking forward to our time of conversation today.
Well, it's a thrill to be here.
Joanne and I have been having conversations for how many years, Joanne, before either of us lived here?
I know.
Mm-hmm.
A long time.
A long time.
Long time.
And I was so surprised when I moved here to come to work that you were already living here. So.
Yeah.
But Joanne and I have known each other through different aging programs and creative writing things. So it's great to sit down. And Don, you came into my life a little later.
Yeah.
But it's been 15 years that I've known you as well.
Yeah.
So, how about Joanne, starting with where you were born and where did you grow up?
I was born in West Virginia in a little place called Dobra, which is there no longer, but it's on my birth certificate. My dad was working for the coal mines during World War II.
And did you live in that area for most of your childhood?
No, as soon as the war was over, Daddy loved Florida. And he always brought us down here on vacations because he liked to fish. And so he bought us a place in Florida, and we moved to Putnam County.
And so a good part of your life was in Putnam County then, and growing up.
Yes.
Don, what about you?
Well, I was born and raised in Mason City, Iowa. Stayed there until I left home to go to college. But graduated from high school, continued right on into junior college in Mason City. And junior college happened to be in the one corner of the high school. So it was like 13th and 14th grade. But anyway, and the junior college had, I think, 450 students. And I was very active in sports, played football, basketball, all the sports. Graduated from junior college, and lo and behold, had no idea where I was going. A guy came up and said, "You want to play football out in South Dakota?" Offered me a scholarship. I said, "Sure, why not?" So I went out to South Dakota and played one fall term, and that didn't go too well academically. So I enlisted in the Army, spent 2 years and grew up in the Army. Got out of the Army, came back to South Dakota, got my bachelor's and master's degree in counseling. And it was interesting that all through my young life, I was very active in the YMCA. I grew up in the YMCA practically. And I wanted to, my first career goal was to be a YMCA director. And after I got in the Army, I got thinking, well, I'm still interested in working with young people, but not necessarily going out and throwing out a basketball and playing football and things like that. So I just got into the counseling aspect of it. And,
that benefited a lot of people, I'm sure.
But I still, wherever I was at, and if they had a YMCA, I was still active in an advisory capacity or on one of their committees of some kind. So YMCA was very important.
And Joanne, did you graduate from Putnam High School, Putnam County High School?
Yes, in Melrose. Yes.
I know that area well, not far from where I grew up either.
Yeah.
After high school, what did you do?
After high school, I got married, had 4 little girls in 6 years, and that didn't work out. So after that, I hadn't been to college, but I started taking classes at Santa Fe Community College, and that's where I met Don.
And who's going to tell the story of how you met?
I didn't hear that.
Who's going to tell the story of how you met? Now we know where.
Well, go ahead, Joe.
I started taking classes, and he came one night with someone else to play. I think it was Stark, and he saw me there, but I didn't know him at all. So, but when I did sign up for classes at the college, he was teaching one of the classes. So I can remember it was called, he showed this film, Pack Your Own Parachute, in it.
Oh, I remember that book.
Yes.
Yeah, it was a career development course. But again, we didn't start dating for several years after that. So.
And did you continued to work at Santa Fe, correct? Or
Well, I probably should back up a little bit from Santa Fe. After I left South Dakota, where I taught 1 year in a middle school, I taught science, which was not my field. But anyway, I left a middle school, went back to South Dakota State College where I'd gotten my degree and was on the staff there. And then I had the ideas of going for a PhD. So I went out to the University of Colorado, moved out to Boulder. I stayed for a year there, and I don't think I was quite PhD material. They were looking for people to do research, and I wasn't interested in research. I wanted to get into counseling, hands-on with students, and they were looking for people to do research. So then that's where I went to a meeting and got the job at the University of Florida. Went to Florida, spent 13 years there as assistant dean of students, and again found that that's as far as I could go without a PhD. I'd never go beyond being assistant dean. The job opened up at Santa Fe Community College in Gainesville, and I applied, got it, and went over there and taught behavioral science. And then, of course, I wound up in a job as director of records and admissions, a job which I said I'd never would do. But you know how that is. You
Yes.
never say something that you would never do because you wind up doing it. But anyway, so I retired from Santa Fe. And we both retired from Santa Fe. I retired 5 years before Joanne did. She had 5 more years to work so she could get her retirement. I got active in Gainesville on different committees, and I took training and became a court mediator. And I was a court mediator in Gainesville for 5 years while she was still working. And then when we moved to, of course we traveled for many years after that, but anyway, when we moved to Darling Park, I still was a court mediator down in Live Oak. I was a court mediator there for 5 years.
Yeah.
And I liked that very much, being a court mediator.
I'm sure that helped a lot of cases get settled in a
Yes.
more amicable way.
Yes.
Yeah, we were settling 65 to 70% of the cases that was coming into the county court.
Wow.
That was,
And Joanne, where do your 4 daughters live?
My four daughters, well, I lost one in a car accident.
Sorry.
But the other 3 live one of them lives in Puerto Rico. She chose to go there to live, and the other one lives in Jacksonville at the beach.
And you have grandchildren?
Oh, yes. And great-grands. I had 6 grandchildren, and I keep counting the greats. They keep on coming. Yeah, they're a lot of fun.
I think I remember this correctly. At one time you were writing a family history
Yes.
to pass on and share with your family.
Yes. Writing was a wonderful way to deal with my grief.
I know that's a legacy they'll cherish.
Yes.
she's written a book about her mother. And being a little biased and prejudiced on my part, I think it ought to be a movie. But Joanne's not interested in pushing it in any way towards that type of media. But anyways, it's a excellent book. She's written several books. She's a good writer.
Well, I co-authored. I was with a group that was writing, started out with poetry, and then several of them had lost children. And there were 5 of us. And so we learned a lot. We shared a lot. We went around and we did seminars and things like that, and we felt like we were helping other people. And I know John Graham Pohl, he was a doctor at the Gainesville Hospital, and he was interested in what we were doing, writing and the Artist Guild, writing as healer. And so he sponsored us to write up something for them to go by. And so we did that, and that was, we loved that. It was, felt like we were helping. He was a children's doctor, cancer. And so we were glad to do that.
What brought you to the village, to this area in Dowling Park to live?
Pardon me?
What brought you to this area? What attracted you to move to?
I had a really good friend, Betty Tresca, and she and I had children in the same school, and she used to come here often, and she had relatives here, TRES, like Tresca Park.
Right.
And she would occasionally bring a little boy home. We both lived on the lake. We were neighbors and friends. And she'd bring a little boy home on the weekends and take him back. And so that's how I became acquainted with the village.
I got familiar with the village. I knew about it for some reason. I can't tell you exactly how I knew about it. But when I was teaching at Santa Fe, I brought a couple of my classes up here. And this was in the 80s, when it was just kind of an orphanage primarily. And because the kids I was talking with, I had probably 12 or 13 kids in these classes. And the subject came up, and I said, I know of a place we could go visit, and they loved it. So I got familiar with, that was before the village church was built, and had quite an experience. Later on, I was working in a grant program at the college for senior citizens, where we were working with them to how to go into elementary schools and be tutors to young kids, things like that. So I was brought a busload of seniors, and this was in August, up to visit Dowling Park. Got as far as Mayo, and our bus broke down.
Oh, gosh.
Now it's 95 degrees, pulled over to the side of the road. Oh, what do I do now? I jumped out, hitchhiked back to Branford, called the college, said, please send a bus. This is what the problem is. Bought a couple cases of Coke, took them back to the seniors. They were standing in the ditch along Highway 27 there, I believe, or is it 19, whatever. And when I got back there, they said, Don, we got something to tell you. What's that? Well, Maurice had to relieve himself, went over behind the trees, and a dog bit him.
Oh, gosh.
So now I've got worried about rabies, you know. So I hitchhiked back to the Branford, got the deputy sheriff, went out, and thank goodness we were able to catch the dog. So the fellow that got bit didn't have to go through the rabies shots. And then finally the college set up the bus, and we took them back. We never got too far as the village here. And as they were getting off the bus, I was really apologizing. I said, I'm sorry. They said, Don, this is the most excitement we've had in our life in a long time.
Sometimes plans don't end just the way you thought.
But anyway, I knew in my mind that was the last trip I was making to Dowling Park, as far as...
with a busload of students.
That's right. Yeah, the youngest one was, I think, 70 on that trip. So they were a group of seniors.
I know travel has been a big part of your lives. And camping, doing that, RVing, is that right?
Yeah, I started at a pretty young age. After my freshman year in college, two other buddies of mine and my classmates, he had a 1928 Model A, and we toured the U.S. in a Model A. And I was fortunate enough to have been in all 48 states by the time I was 21. Now, I didn't make them all on that trip with the Model A, but after the ones that I hadn't been in when I was in the Army, I made it up visiting all 48, so by the time I was 21. And then, of course, after Joanne retired, we took to the road and visited all 49 states at that time.
And I hear you've not been to one because there's not a bridge there.
When they build a bridge, we would consider going.
To Hawaii.
Yeah. She's been to Hawaii. I have not been to Hawaii.
It's beautiful.
It is beautiful. Don, was the Model A more dependable than that bus?
Oh, very definitely. If there was a problem with that, we just had a pair of pliers and a screwdriver, and we could fix the Model A just right on the spot. But we got stuck in the beach at Daytona Beach. Now, three boys from Iowa, having never seen the ocean before. We drove out there, jumped out, had somebody take our picture. Here comes the tide. The tires on a Model A are about that big around, and anyway, we just started sinking. And of course, they had to call a tow truck. We had ladies on their hands and knees digging the sand out from the tires, trying to get us out. Of course, a wave would come in and fill it right in. Here comes the Daytona Beach paper, and they wanted to do a big story on 3 boys from Iowa stuck in the beach. You know. They took our picture, but we always camped out on the trip. We never stayed in a motel. We cooked our own meal as much as we could, because we were just on pennies. We didn't. And that's really when I started my photography, because my mother had given me a small camera and 1 roll of film.
That didn't last long, did it?
Oh, I would have loved to have had a digital camera back in those years, but so I just have a few pictures that I took that I was able to save, and I've made a little video of our trip that we made in the Model A.
Well, Don, you have made a lot of videos of trips and places you've been, right?
Right.
Would you share with us about how you volunteered at Dossier and other places showing those videos?
Right. I've probably made over 200 videos for TV2 of birthday parties, cantatas, and different things like that. But currently I'm taking my videos that I've made from pictures that, you know, when I took the pictures, I had no idea that where we would end up or what would be done with them. But thank goodness I take them, go over to Good Sam, Dossier, show it to them, get them involved. Have you ever been to the Zion National Park? Tell me about your experiences, and I'll tell them what my experiences were. So I get them involved, and they like it.
And Joanne, you've done a lot of volunteer work around the village too. Would you share some of that with us?
Well, I can't think of anything.
Oh gosh, you worked on Village Voices?
Oh, yes. I love doing that, Village Voices, and helping people write. We started a writing club over at the Dossier and kept that going for, several years, and then, different things like that.
And for our viewers who don't know, Village Voices is a almost annual publication of writing by residents here at the village and members and staff. And the pandemic kind of slowed us down last year, but I understand we're going to have a copy. It'll be a 2-year book. So that's another thing.
I was teaching classes, about 10 of us get together and share our life stories so that we could save those, write them down for the children and the grandchildren and save them. And it was called a Story Keepers class. And I enjoyed that a lot, and so did the other girls too when they were writing and sharing. But that was history, family history, and I think that's so very important.
I do too. My son a number of years ago gave me it's called a grandmother's journal. And I kept putting off doing it. And so I finished all but about 5 questions from during the pandemic. That was one of the things I've accomplished. And
Yeah.
One year they did something very special with the Village Voices. Joanne and another lady were able to take several of the stories and write them so they would be skits. And then we were able to get several people from the village to act out the skits. And then we had a big meeting up at the village where we would reenact the stories from the, and so their stories come to life, you know. I've had times of trying to get that started again, but you know, planting the seed on other people, but it hasn't taken hold yet.
well, I remember one of them was about a doll, right?
A cloth doll.
Cloth doll.
Yeah.
That just flashed through my memory. It was really well done, and it was meaningful. And it was somebody else's story, I believe.
Yes.
And it was meaningful to that person as well to have that done.
I think that's a classic little story, you know, it lasts about 3 minutes. But to me, it just catches my emotion every time I see it, you know.
And one little girl from here acted in it too. And what was her name?
Emma.
Emma.
Oh.
Emma Harmon. She was the doll.
Yeah, and Lindsay Carter was there.
Both of you have had a lot of experience working with young people. What advice would you give a young person today?
Wow.
Well, I would say, you know, stay close with your church family, and know that you never walk alone. And you're going to have a lot of problems in the world, and the only way you can deal with them is to know God, the Lord.
That's wonderful advice. What about
My
you?
feelings are that to go along with what she was saying, is that I think the kids need to be taught how to work. I really think that every kid ought to have a job where they have to work. And also to understand that life isn't all ups. There's going to be times we get knocked down. And it's a matter of how long you stay down before you get yourself back up. That's important. But those are hard lessons to teach.
And sometimes you just have to learn them the hard way.
Yes.
Learn them the hard way.
Hurting.
Well, Don, I think one piece of advice is your trip. You know, you probably the 3 of you learned more on that trip than probably that length of time you learned other things. I think travel is important and getting to...
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely. I was thinking the other day about what are the things that I remember the most about our travels. And it's when you meet, it's not going to the Grand Canyon. Everybody knows the Grand Canyon. Yeah. But when we were in Santa Fe, New Mexico, we went to a little chapel where we learned about the miraculous staircase. Yes. And that story has just stuck with me. And that's one of the first things that come to my mind when I think of our travels is the story that goes behind this staircase in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Another one is when we were at Sault Ste. Marie in northern Michigan, that we were watching in a visitor center, watching about the history of the locks and so forth there. And they were talking about the big freighter, I think the Fitzgerald had sunk. Joanne noticed a couple right in front of us. They were crying. She went up and talked with them afterwards and found out that they were connected with that Fitzgerald, you know.
Wow.
And it just, to get the story. And another, go ahead.
Their father was supposed to come on that boat, and something told him not to, and he didn't. And, you know, that was something that would have happened.
Then when we were at the Mount St. Helens, where they had the volcano, we were at the visitor center right near the volcano, watching the movie where they explained the history of the eruption and so forth. There again, Joanne noticed a couple, or a lady with several kids right in front of us, was crying. Went up and talked with her, what was the problem? She lived there the time that the volcano erupted. And so she gave us first-hand stories. So that's what I remember from our trips, is the people that we met.
They thought the end of the world was coming. And had it been, I think it was Sunday, had it been another day, all of the men would have been out there working because they logged up there.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
We were in Sedona, Arizona, sitting in our chair beside the RV. Up walks a big cowboy with a big 10-gallon hat with boots and so forth. And he invites us to the campfire that night at the campground. And it so happens that this cowboy was a poet. And so we went to the campfire that night, and he read or recited his poetry. And to have a cowboy be a poet, you know, generally you don't make the connection between that, but he had quite a story. And then Joanne, of course, had her poetry, and she was able to read her book. She got some of hers in.
Yeah, the scenery often is the people you meet along the way, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
And the blessing.
It really is.
Then there's one more story I'll bore you with.
Please go ahead.
We were going to Zion Park. Drove by, and I missed the cutoff to go into Zion. And I got kind of perturbed because Joanne's her responsibility. She's the navigator. And we missed a turn, a narrow road, pulling a truck. We couldn't turn around. Went about another 8 or 10 miles. Here's a little campground. Thank goodness we pulled in there. It was one of the best things that ever happened to us. It was just a little mom and pop campground. But we got to know them, and they said we could help them. We could ride their horses. On Friday night, he cooked a campfire dinner for us with great big steel pots, where in one pot he would have the meat, in another pot he would have the potatoes, another one the vegetables, and they would be stacked up on top of one another, where that heat would cook them all at one time, you know.
And probably in the right temperatures, by the way.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Those were our serendipity times.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, this has been a wonderful time sitting and visiting with the two of you. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
And we hope you'll tune in to other Front Porch Conversations.